Probably the most frustrating thing that can happen to you when you start programming Lego robots is for you to write a program, download it to your NXT, and find when you run it on your NXT, the robot doesn't do what you expected it to do. In the next 2 lessons, I'm going to walk you through the 2 most common ways that this happens to my students at this point in an Intro to Robot Programming class. By the end of these lessons, you'll understand what's going on, and you'll know what to do in the future if you do happen to bump into them again on your own. Yet again, I want to make sure you're doing exactly the same thing as I am and that you don't encounter these problems until I explain how to deal with them. So please quit from your NXT software on your computer and turn off your NXT before you continue. This is the last time I'm going to ask you to do this. After this lesson, if you do encounter the problem I'm concerned about, you'll know how to deal with it. Okay, so start up your software again. And the first thing I want to do is open up your Sleepy Goodnight program. So click on the File menu and say Open. And I got a bunch of programs in here, but there's my Sleepy Night, and I'll say OK. And here's the program we just wrote a minute ago. Just to review, let me turn on my robot. And I'll download the program. We're back up at My Files, so I'm going to push the orange button to select that. And Software Files, push the orange button. And if you check, it does indeed say Sleepy Night. So I'll push the orange button, and we'll run it. Great. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to make a new program that does the same thing, but I want to change the picture in between the words good and night. Okay? And I could start from scratch, of course, but you know what? I'm just going to take this program and I'm going to do a save as. So I'm going to go to the File menu and I'm going to save as, and I'm going to save it as Sleepy Crazy. Save. Okay, cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to get another display block and click and drag that over, and I want to put it in between the 2 sound blocks. And actually, if you kind of slowly move up, you'll see that white thing goes in there, and then the bricks move apart to let me drop this in. So I'll let go. And so now on the sequence beam, right now we've got sleepy eyes, says good, smiley face, we'll change that in a minute, and it says night. So I actually want this to be a crazy picture in here, so we'll go down into the configuration panel, and I happen to know that there's something called crazy. Let's find it. Here we go, Crazy01. There we go. So let's save this program, and then I'm going to download it to the NXT. Now, when we run it, it doesn't work. Let me just do it again so you can see. We've got the sleepy eyes, but we don't have the crazy eyes. So what just happened? Well, actually, if you look closely at the NXT screen, you'll see exactly what's going on. On the screen, it says we're running the Sleepy Night program, not the Sleepy Crazy program. So what I need to do is back up with the gray button, and now it says Sleepy Crazy. So now if I go in, and now if I say run, it gives us both eyes. You might argue that the NXT didn't behave logically, that when a new program's downloaded, the NXT should expect that you want to run the new program now. And yet, if someone from Lego came up to me and said, hey Jenny, tell us how this should work, I would tell them that when you do a download, the NXT should change its screen. But they didn't ask us, and that's not the way the NXT works. That brings us to a key concept in computing. Computers are just not very smart. In the case of the NXT, it works the way it's been designed to work, which is not necessarily how you or I would have designed it, but it's the only way it knows how to work. Remember the peanut butter and jelly example. Computers take everything you say very literally, even if what you tell them to do doesn't make sense. Even if what you want them to do is obvious to you, it's not obvious to them. Whenever something appears to go wrong with your NXT, or with your computer for that matter, it can often help to keep this in mind. By the way, I've taught variants of introductory programming courses to hundreds, maybe even thousands of students at this point. And in virtually every class, I encounter a few students who truly believe that they are completely incapable of using computers. These two quotes, "computers don't like me" and "I can't ever get computers to do what I want," are extremely typical. And they come from some incredibly bright students. So here's what I tell them. First off, when a computer doesn't do something you want it to do, it's not being mean, it's just confused. Maybe it beeps at you incessantly. Rather than thinking of the beeping as anger or hostility, you really need to think of it as a cry for help. And when the computer doesn't do what you want it to, that's often because you assume the computer's much smarter than you, when in fact the reverse is the case. We're back to the peanut butter and jelly example again. You're the smart one. The computer's relying on you to break down the problem into smaller pieces that it can understand. Alternatively, it helps some people to think of the computer as a somewhat obnoxious 6-year-old who chooses to take everything you say very literally. You know how that works. You say, "Give me a minute," and they immediately begin counting to 60. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, and so on. On a bad day as a parent, this caused me no end of frustration. But on good days, as a parent who's also a computer scientist, I could occasionally use it to my advantage. If you can state the instructions precisely enough, your 6-year-old, if he or she is willing to follow your directions at all, of course, will actually complete the task. The good news is that your computer and your NXT is always willing to follow your instructions. So your job is to state those instructions as precisely as you can in a language that your computer or NXT can understand. Okay, so let's review what we learned in this lesson. First, we discussed one reason why the NXT might not do what you expect it to do. Specifically, you downloaded a new program, but you're still running the old one. So you need to remember that if the NXT isn't doing what you expect it to do, the first thing to check is the NXT screen and confirm that you're running the correct program. By the way, it's worth noting that the NXT display is so small that it only shows the first 15 or so characters in a program name. So if you've written two different programs, the first called Introduction to Motors and the second called Introduction to Sound, on your NXT screen, you'll only see the words Introduction to in both cases, since that already uses up all 15 characters, and you won't be able to distinguish between them. The other thing we talked about in this lesson is the importance of remembering that computers aren't very smart. They just do what you tell them to do. So most of the time, if a computer isn't doing what you expect, you should look very closely at what you're telling it to do and see if that makes sense from the computer's point of view. We'll have to think about this again in the next lesson.